Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and hello, school board members. I would ask each of you and the audience, at what point do you stand up and say, enough? Do you follow orders no matter what the results will be? Do you tremor at every tactic used to stop you from doing what is right? United we stand, divided we fall aptly applies to the high-stakes testing struggle. It would be ludicrous to think if Florida school boards took a strong stand and opted out that all of those students would fail to graduate. We all know there are alternative tests available, such as ACT, SAT, and PERT that will qualify students for a general diploma. Colleges who are interested in students will look at their GPAs and portfolios, which are better representations of their academic skills than one test. The Florida Constitution mandates provision of a uniform, efficient, safe, secure, and high-quality system of free public education. These mandates conflict with high-stakes testing. The testing does not meet any of the stipulations in the Florida Constitution. Using 40% of class time for testing, retesting, and test preparation cannot be considered high quality. The money saved by opting a district out of expensive high-stakes testing would be plentiful. It could be used to hire more teachers. The testing companies and politicians who have wrapped up this package will not like it being ripped apart. However, the future of American education is much more important than worrying about a quid pro quo arrangement on the backs of our students. Opt Miami-Dade County out, or at least make the information easily accessible for students to opt out individually. Do what is right and let the consequences follow. I do not believe that you should continue with these high-stakes testing in Miami-Dade County or the rest of Florida. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Luis Gonzalez. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon. Congratulations to the Miami-Dade School Board for achieving remarkable graduation rates, for becoming financially solvent, for having Hispanic students that score #1 on the AP test, and for allowing better use for funds to the benefit of teachers, instruction, students, and facilities. I applaud innovation and continuous process improvement. Nevertheless, why all the testing? Who does this testing benefit? This isn't just teaching to the test, it is teaching to the test based on questionable, if not illegal, mandates. You have to admit you are creating an environment not of classroom learning, but of effective test taking. I would call that inappropriate teaching. In 2011, the National Research Council, whose membership contains over 300 Nobel laureates and many of the most recognized names in their field, released their report, Incentives and Test-Based Accountability in Education. The councils of the National Academy of Sciences, the National Academy of Engineering, and the Institute of Medicine all supported the study. The conclusion of the study was that the emphasis on testing yielded little learning progress but caused significant harm. No Child Left Behind demonstrated what happens when tests are misused. Negative consequences include narrowing the curriculum, teaching to the test, pushing students out of the school, driving teachers out of the profession, and undermining student engagement and school climate. This is a test that was done in a research study that was done in 2011. As we all know, Common Core was commissioned in 2009. Race to the Top was done in 2009. Both of those required mandates for higher stakes assessment testing. Much of this report was buried just in the same way the Sandria report on No Child Left Behind was buried. I ask you to re-examine your testing schedule and please stop the redundant and unnecessary testing of our students and children in Miami-Dade County. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Furman, sir, you're down for C1.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Obviously, there's been a lot of conversation and interest, not just about testing in and of itself, but also our schedule. My question to staff, superintendent, whoever, is this. Could somebody please, for the public, take this document that looks so ominous and kind of break it down so that when I see in the paper 172 days out of 180 our children are testing, there are a lot of folks out there who don't understand what that really means in terms of our kids. And I think it would do us very well to educate everyone as to what this really means. The second part of my question, Madam Chair, would be this. There's a lot of references and a lot of references to actions that others have taken and questioning whether or not we are doing the right thing for kids. And I know that over the past year and a half, 2 years, if not longer, our superintendent has taken the lead on several initiatives, whether it be looking out for our ELL students, our students with special needs, testing, et cetera. I read, I guess as all of us have, a synopsis of an article he wrote that I think brings a lot of credibility to at least what we, the 9 of us, do on this board. And so if the superintendent was so inclined, I certainly would love to hear the rest of the story following what this testing calendar really looks like. Because when I look at it, if my children were still in school, I would be confused, and quite frankly, it's overwhelming. And I agree, we should not, and I don't know if it's in here, but we should not have any redundancy of testing. So I would appreciate any kind of assistance on that.
Mrs. Izquierdo, Mr. Superintendent, who would like to?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the question from Dr. Feldman. I think it's fair to say that anybody would, particularly as that document, even though it was thoroughly explained, it was used through the megaphonic and less than clear explanation of print media to send out a message that was not comprehensive. And this was after a comprehensive conversation with the person who possessed the megaphone. So let's begin there. The unfortunate thing here as well is by the time that megaphone was used and an article was produced, there was prior knowledge that, as you referenced, Dr. Feldman, the one entity district in Florida that decided to take a position on this matter, it was known, as that article was being written, that that district had already convened an emergency meeting to reverse that decision. That meeting being called by one of the people who had voted for that initial decision, guaranteeing almost the fact that there would be a reversal of that position. It is sad that that was not included. And certainly what I know is this: emotion sells. Emotion sells. And at some point we ought to recognize that and, just as you're asking now, tell the truth. And that is the reason why I decided to pen over the weekend, out of frustration, as you correctly said, going back to 2 to 3 years of arguing these issues, attempting to move the needle of reasonableness as far as testing is concerned statewide, winning some, losing some, but never abandoning hope of revisiting those that we lost towards the ultimate goal of advancing the greater good. And the greater good for us is about teachers, students, community, public education. So this weekend, that's why I decided to write that. I'm going to make some additional comments, but you asked a very specific question that I would like Ms. Izquierdo and Ms. Gisela Field to actually address. And that is, okay, it seems like an ominous plan. What is, and I listened with attentive care to the speaker, what is legally mandated by the entities that fund public education versus what is on that plan that you as a board, myself as superintendent and staff, actually provide voluntarily. And as Mrs. Izquierdo and Ms. Field will speak about this, let me unequivocally tell you that the vast majority of assessment requirements are statutorily, legally mandated, period. One of the reasons why the reversal of position adopted just yesterday by a district north of us, the reason why they did that is because it was clear that there are significant and dramatic consequences by adopting that position. Now, both you and I, and by you and I mean you, capital Y, we know how to stand tall for what's right. We've done it. But when we've come across law that we believe does not stand for the values that we believe are correct, we've sued. We take legal action. We approach legislators through lobbying and advocacy efforts to reverse that. At no point can individuals who take an oath to uphold the law say, I'm not going to follow it because I don't like it or I believe it's unfair. So this is one of those. We all collectively have a great deal of discomfort with a number of issues that have been raised. And I declare them so that there is no doubt whatsoever as to my discomfort, but then I did something that I don't hear other people doing, which is, okay, if it's broken, how do you fix it? It is not good enough to just throw mud at the wall or to just decry something and throw out the baby with the bathwater. That is why going from too much assessment over testing, which I have said for years, I believe is the current condition in the state of Florida and across the country, to go from over testing to no testing at all is asking for us to go back in time. It's telling us that we need to go back in history and allow what used to happen before, which is allow the curtain of high-performing schools or systems to hide pockets of underperforming schools or children, even those children who are struggling in high-performing schools. Assessment is about telling the truth, and testing is the true tool of accountability. I want to know if my child is learning and to what extent. I want to know that. Just like I want to know as a father if my child is growing, right, at the appropriate pace. I want to know. Physical and intellectual development are key. Cognitive development is key. How do you know? How do you know? Now, there's a difference between true and reasonable assessment and unreasonable, excessive assessment. And that is the key here. That's the point that's in question. It's not just accountability or assessment, is how it's being done, how often it's being done, by whom, and at what cost. And I think those are reasonable questions. But we ought to be in a position of absolutely rejecting outright this premise that it's an all or none proposition. It cannot be that. So, with the chair's permission, I would like Mrs. Izquierdo and Ms. Field to speak specifically to the question that Dr. Feldman asked, and then I'll come back and make some additional comments. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Superintendent. Ms. Izquierdo or Ms. Field?
Good afternoon. Through the chair, I am going to ask Ms. Field to go into greater detail as Dr. Feldman requested, but I do want to just point out two things. As your chief academic officer, I cannot advocate for teaching without assessment. Your teachers, like surgeons, perform exams on students to progress monitor to see how they're doing so that they can differentiate instruction and inform the teaching and learning environment in their classrooms. And I think that we all agree that assessment is necessary in that regard when it serves that purpose. Secondly, a statement was made relative to teaching to the test. And while perhaps that would be appropriate to say a year ago, 2 years ago, maybe in another district, not in Miami-Dade County Public Schools, it's really inappropriate to say teaching to the test at this moment because the test, as it has not been written. So to say that our teachers in Miami-Dade County Public Schools will be teaching to a test that is not yet written is it's a little bit misleading. We hope and we know that our teachers are teaching to standards, the Florida state standards. Speaking specifically of the calendar before you today, this calendar is very comprehensive, as Dr. Feldman said, and as has been reported in the media. I think one of the things that our assessment office does very well is to consolidate into one single document every time that students are offered an opportunity to take an exam. Exams such as advanced placement exams, Cambridge exams, ACT, SAT, college entrance exams, retake opportunities for students that have failed a state assessment that requires passing in order to be promoted to the next grade level or, in fact, to graduate from high school so that they can receive a diploma. So all of those opportunities are listed in our calendar. And perhaps it would be a little bit more palatable to the public if we didn't list all the opportunities and just specifically listed those that are the one time that the student sits for a test, but I think we would be doing a disservice to do so. So I would like Ms. Field to go into greater detail about the two-page testing calendar before you. And I'd like to point out that it includes not only district but state, national, and international opportunities for assessment of our students.
Ms. Field?
Through the chair.
Yeah.
Thank you. And as Mrs. Girdo indicated, this is a very comprehensive calendar. As a matter of fact, it's not any different than it has been for the last 4 or 5 years. If you look at the historical calendars, other than a possible new assessment or the change of the FCAT to FCAT 2.0 or the new FCAT to the new FSA, there are similar, pretty much the same tests that have been offered, all the accelerated examinations, AP, IB, Cambridge. One of the new tests that came on board, as you all know, was the PERT, which was to allow children to satisfy a graduation requirement. But I'll walk you briefly through the calendar, but it should be noted, as Mrs. Girdo said, not all students participate in every one of these assessments. In some cases, it's optional for students to participate, and they're there so that parents and the public can know when, in fact, certain opportunities are being afforded to students. The media published some information regarding testing starting as early in the summer. Well, those are opportunities were afforded to students who did not pass a graduation requirement or who did not pass the 3rd grade assessment and were given another opportunity to move on to the 4th grade.
So,
Obviously,
Gisela, please allow me just a mid-speech commentary. This is what I refer to when I say, when you have the megaphone of information dissemination to the community, and you put that comment out there, oh my God, we're assessing kids in the summer, without qualifying that and providing a context, it's irresponsible. When in fact, we are providing yet again an opportunity for children who may not graduate if we don't give them an additional opportunity. If it's up to me, I would keep giving them opportunities until they graduate. And depriving individuals of the opportunity to actually understand the full context of this picture is, as I said earlier, irresponsible. It's irresponsible. Nobody's debating the fact that there's possibly duplicative assessment. We have been saying that all along. At some point, and I'm going to turn it over back to Gisela Field, that we ought to ask the question is, this is the same testing calendar that's been in existence for years. For years. The testing calendar here versus Palm Beach versus Broward is virtually indistinguishable. Everybody takes the same exams. The only latitude we have, meaning the exams or the tests that we voluntarily make available to students, are those that we absolutely should. AP, IB, advanced placement, SAT, ACT. Ask the student advisor if he wants to be denied the opportunity of having access to those voluntary assessments. Ask those kids who have passed 5, 10 AP classes and exams through the College Board if they want to be deprived for the sake of reducing assessment. No, because they're saving the equivalent sometimes of 2 years of college education by taking those classes in high school and passing those assessments. So the ones we control, Madam Chair, members of the board, the ones we control are good assessments because they represent good opportunities for students to get ahead, to advance, to save money. Okay? Ms. Field, please, through the chair.
Yes. Ms. Field?
through the chair.
Yes.
And I'd also like to point out that those summer assessments are not mandated, they're optional, but in the case of a parent who can't afford to be able to come back or leaves the country, we offer those opportunities again in the fall. Again, another opportunity for a student to meet the 3rd grade graduation requirement or to meet the 10th grade graduation requirement. As you walk through the calendar, you're going to find that a lot of these assessments, again, nothing different except for one additional item from prior years, other than the new state assessment program. They're windows. And it should be noted that in many cases, when we see a window of 2 weeks or 3 weeks, it doesn't mean the student is sitting and being tested every day. It's a window for testing because a lot of the new assessments are computer-based. And unlike in the old days when they were paper-based, and we could sit and say, we're going to test reading today, so every 9th grader sat in their homeroom. We started the administration of the reading assessment. 2 hours later, we were done. We picked up all of the secure documents, and that was it. And we had a couple of makeups. Now we have to take 1,000 9th graders and funnel them through computer labs. Number one. Number two, because of the ability of using computers and not paper pencil and providing children more opportunity to succeed, even though there are windows of testing, there are opportunities for extended time, right? Our English language learners get extended time and sometimes even all day to complete a test on the computer. Once again, we have to provide that ability to move and shift students around to provide them with all of the extended time, double sessions, etc. So when you look at a window for assessment here, and then I'm going to walk you to the spring, okay? Because the spring is exactly where the big testing window is, which is the new state assessment, the Florida Standards Assessment. When you look at the calendar and it says March 16th through April 10th, that doesn't mean that my ninth grader is sitting testing for every single day. A ninth grader will be taking a reading exam and a possible math exam. It could be an end of course. There will be 2 sessions for reading, about 90 minutes, and there may be 2 sessions for the math. 2 days for reading, 2 days for math, 4 days that student is done testing, unless the student was absent, etc. The student may or may not start on the first day of the window. I mean, schools generate their schedule. They may do it by homeroom, they may do it by last name, they may do it by course. So it baffles me when I read that we are testing, all but 8 days of our 180 instructional days, when in fact, a student taking an English and a math test in the springtime as part of our state assessment may be testing 4 or 5 days. He may or may not have participated in advanced placement or IB. He may or may not have participated in the beginning of the year in the fair if they had scored in level 1 or 2. He may or may not have participated on the PSAT, depending on what grade level. So it's very confusing, I understand, to look at this schedule, but I want to make it clear that we are not testing kids for 172, 73 days out of the year. The addition to this calendar that was not here before is one line, and that is the district-developed end-of-course assessment that happens at the end of the year. And that, as you all know, is based on the requirement for us to do teacher evaluations, and that for this year, for 14-15, we have to be able to measure all of the courses that are being taught outside those that are currently measured by state assessment or AP, IB, Cambridge. So those honors and regular courses that don't have an assessment, we as part of the district and in collaboration with the Race to the Top grants that were awarded across the state are creating and will be delivering assessments for all of those courses on the computer in order to fulfill the teacher evaluation requirement.
So,
all under state statute, by the way.
Before we go further, Madam Chair, if I can, just on this one piece, which is the testing, let me, with all due respect, let me just share how a different set of lenses. All right? I'm home, and I'm just a parent. I'm a regular parent, and I get the testing calendar pops up on my screen, which it does, right, from under Dade County Schools, and I see this. And if I was just to look at, let's just say, April 13th to May 29th, it says Florida Assessment for Instruction in Reading, period 3. And then it says grades 3, K to 3, grades 4 to 10, grades 11 to 12. My thinking, not having been where you're sitting for 20 plus years as an expert or being with as a teacher, is that, oh my gosh, my child who's in 2nd grade is going to be sitting there from April 13th to May 29th. Maybe what I'm looking for would be another column that told parents this is the average number of days of testing, so that if there was April 13th to May 29th, kindergarten to 3rd grade testing, that's a long time, right? But the average, the expectation, not if you're sick, not if you come in late, whatever, might be 3 days for kindergarten. So if we had a 3 down there, which would be an average, it doesn't mean you have to stick to it, doesn't mean that, we lie if you take a 4th day, but it gives us a sense of reality that we don't normally have, because all we have is, and it's a lot. And sometimes having this much like sometimes talking too much, which I might be doing, confuses the issue. But having this in the small print tells us, gosh, there's a lot to put on this paper. I'm not finding fault in how we do things. I'm trying to find a way that will assist our parents who are not as adept at understanding this as others, to understand that if they were to see 172 days out of 100, they could say, well, wait a minute, let me count this up. My 3rd grader only has 22 days that they're expected to be tested. That's phenomenal. That's all, you know. I now understand maybe you're talking about a different school, a district. Okay?
Mrs. Gerda wants to say something?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As a matter of fact, we have something that Iraida's shop, Ms. Mendez-Cardaya's shop, puts together, which is a parent resource toolkit. And in that toolkit, a parent can drop down by grade level and see exactly what assessments are affecting his or her child. To your point about looking at it through a different lens, yesterday my child came home. I have a junior, and she came home and she was given a paper about the National Merit Scholarship Qualifying Test. And so for her to be able to get, in addition to Bright Futures, another opportunity at a scholarship, she would have to sit for a PSAT as a junior, which she already took as a sophomore before. So I immediately went to the calendar to see when that test was being offered to make sure my child was registered, because it would be dollars in our pockets for college. So those are the kind of things that parents would use it for. But absolutely, I think one of the things that we can do is through school operations and their back to school night, we'll be happy to provide them with that information so they can package it for parents and they can access the parent resource guide that Ms. Mendez-Cardaya's office puts out. I think that's what you're looking for.
Correct. Yeah. I agree. I am looking for that. And I just need the understanding to be there, and I don't sense it yet. I'm just a regular, everyday, two-job parent. I don't know if I'm going to a drop-down toolkit. The only toolkit I know is what's around my waist when I go fix the roof. So, you know, keeping in mind that this set of lenses is different than what we're used to doing on that side of the dais helps. And I think, Mr. Superintendent, and that would be wonderful if our parents got a form at open house, and if they didn't come to open house, if kids were able to bring it down, bring it home, and just show them how many days we expect each of their children in these grades to be tested. It would certainly alleviate a whole lot of frustration, maybe, and apprehension.
Are you finished, Dr. Feldman?
Yes, ma'am.
I have Dr. Karp and Ms. Regalado.
Thank you. I think that Dr. Feldman and staff came to the point that I was going to mention about the user-friendly version. This is certainly helpful for us as a board and those to look at everything, the big picture, and to see where all of the testing dates occur. But that drop down or any kind of a mechanism by which parents can really look, even if we break it down by grade levels or by primary, intermediate, secondary, because even teachers look at a very large spreadsheet of all of the testing, and that can be difficult when you're trying to schedule activities. You can actually get a little confused saying, well, you know, can I really schedule this event, or can I do this particular activity with my students, because you see a lot of different testing going on. So any opportunity to indicate where something is optional, any opportunity to note where there is a window, any opportunity just to make it a little more clear for the average teacher, for the average parent, I think will help us tremendously. And I know that the superintendent wrote a great piece, which was in the paper, and I think that the communication with the media will be key, because even in the case of the story that we're alluding to in the number of days for testing, what I learned in Journalism 101 is that you have other people that write the headlines. So when you flip to that next page and you see only 8 days without testing, you may have worked with the writer, let's say, or with the editorial board, but maybe somebody else that's writing the headline wasn't privy to the conversation. So it really just has to be an effort where we're communicating with the media in general as to what's really happening, so that kind of information doesn't go out there that actually creates more confusion. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Regalado?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I want to thank Board Member Feldman for starting this discussion on this. I think a lot of us received a lot of calls and emails regarding the same, and I want to thank Mrs. Izquierdo and Gisela for their explanation and for even doing interviews on this. I know it's not a fun topic. But I think it's also an opportunity to have a broader conversation, and the superintendent, obviously, in what he has written, has brought up a lot of issues that we have talked about on this dais. When we talk about educating our parents, and we said this when the decision was made in Tallahassee to sunset the FCAT, We knew back then that the sunsetting of the FCAT was going to lead parents to believe that somehow there was an end to testing. We mentioned it board meeting after board meeting after board meeting about how there was going to be a misconception. We had parents dancing in the streets, the FCAT was over. And we tried to explain that another test was coming, and it's just that at the Tallahassee level, there hadn't been a decision on what that test would look like. Then the Department of Education, at the state level, rolled out Common Core in a way that confused everyone, and it became a very political issue. But I think at the foundation of everything that has happened over the last 2 years, there is a viable concern on behalf of parents and residents about the amount of testing. And I think that we all concur with that. And I have been the first one to say that every year when we go to Tallahassee, one of the things that we wish people would do is ask their state representatives and senators about testing. Because they always ask us about it, but nobody asks the people who make the decisions about it. So I concur with my fellow board members on providing this in a way where parents understand which is a state mandate and which is a federal mandate and which are optional. I've spent the last few days talking to a lot of parents about what is optional, and I'll use myself as an example. When I was a senior at Coral Gables Senior High, you took the SAT once, and that was it. Now, obviously, you can take the SAT 1,000,000 times, and children are taking it in 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade. And as a parent, I want my child to have that advantage because I'm aware of how important the SAT and the ACT are. And I think a lot of parents don't understand that. The same when we talk about AP testing and how important AP testing has become to the college admission program. A lot of parents don't understand that back in the day, if you took an AP exam, that was spectacular. But right now, it's expected that if you're going to go to a college or a university, you have at least taken one AP exam, and colleges really want to see if you can do that level of work. So I totally concur with the comments that have been made by staff about access and the importance of informing parents. That being said, I do think that at some point we have to have a conversation about merit pay. We know that's the big question mark. We know exactly what happened, and I think that we have to be honest with people about the unintended consequences that we forecasted about merit pay. When we agreed to that in the Race to the Top application, when this board sat here and talked about the 220 teachers that we were going to have to fire and how the merit pay paradigm was going to work, nobody thought that Tallahassee would run with that and pass an unfunded mandate for merit pay. And I remember sitting in, hearing reports from Iraida on committee on how they said that they were going to create the exams, and they were going to create the exams. The next year they were going to create a database, and we were going to have access to that. So there's a lot of things that have happened since that initially came up. And what parents need to understand is that even though that legislation occurred several years ago, it has come time. And now we are at a place where we have to create exams for all these different classes that normally do not have exams. And it has fallen upon us. And we said it 3 years ago when they first brought this up, and they said it's not going to fall on your shoulders. The state is going to do it. And here we are. Everybody has forgotten. All the promises, have been forgotten. And now our staff has to create these exams, and we have to administer them. And as a parent, I don't want my kid to take an art exam and a music exam and a Spanish exam. I know how my kid is doing in those classes. And I didn't agree with that when that was passed in Tallahassee. And we said that was absurd when that happened. And we've never really dealt with it. We put a Band-Aid on it. We put a Band-Aid on it. We put a Band-Aid on it. We kicked the can. We've asked for more time to implement it. But I really hope that when we start talking about our legislative priorities in Tallahassee, we consider what our parents are saying. Because I think that once you explain to parents that a large component of these exams that they're going to see this year in particular is tied to decisions that were made with merit pay that came without funding, let's be clear, and that were the responsibility of the state to create and have now fallen on us. And if it's a heavy burden on Miami-Dade County Public Schools, who's the fourth largest school district, I can only imagine how this burden plays out for other school districts. So I really think that we need to talk about this further, and we need to consider what the options are and how we can permanently fix this in Tallahassee, as opposed to just asking for more time and telling our parents that this is about accountability. A lot of this is about accountability. A lot of these tests are important. A lot of these tests gauge what our students are learning. However, the end of term exams that were created by the merit pay paradigm, I don't think do that. I think that's just meeting a legislative requirement that came without funding, that came without guidance, and came with a lot of promises that were unfulfilled to this and the other 66 districts. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Regalado. Dr. Bandersman-Nigo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to add some comments. I've listened to all of my colleagues, and of course they've laid out a premise that we need to look at in terms of what we're doing. But because we don't have many parents sitting in this room, I should say that we all have a head start on the average parent. So I'm looking at this as a teachable moment, and hopefully our principals will have an opportunity to work with our parents and know that this is absolutely necessary, and that our children will be the beneficiaries. But I want the parents to know that the assessment, as I said, is necessary, but I want them to also know how do we use the results, the findings. I think the teachers' voices have been silenced when they have an opportunity to tell parents what their students have learned and how it's going to be used to prescribe a lesson that they're going to teach to move the children forward. Someone said something about testing, as it were. Testing is always good. We do this when we go to our doctors and all, but when I looked at this calendar over and over and over again, and it is a little cumbersome. So I would want us to have parents know that we do use what teachers have taught our children and the learning that has come about, but our parents are not sure if what they learn in the classroom, of course, is measured by all of these tests that we give them. We've got to give them a chance to know what is going on in those classrooms and how we test them. So I would like to know if it's possible that our teachers are playing a role in how I know the state and the federal government, but do we have any teachers who sit on maybe a committee or a round table to talk about the kinds of tests that we give our children? And if they are, do they have the ability to make sure that the calendar is put in place? I think that we can also look at how we draft and craft this calendar and do a little bit more, not thinking that you're not doing a great job, because I wouldn't want to do it. I would not want to be in middle school or senior high school trying to get it together to give all of these exams. But it would be a little bit great, I think, that if we could do a little something and make it a little more elementary for, quote unquote, as one of my colleagues said, the average parent. Because when I look at it, having a head start with so much information, I am still trying to figure out if it's absolutely necessary. Do we need all of this? And if we do, how do we make it clear? We're looking at clarity for our parents, and it's not even the average parent. It's just the parent who does not know what's going on in the schools, and some of the schools need to take a look at what their parents know and don't know. And I want to digress for a moment. I looked at my scores, my responses on children who were retained in third grade. I don't even know if our parents know about their children being retained and why, and it could have been prevented. I would want to know if we can do something to bring that message to our parents also. Those are my comments. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Grubel, sir?
Thank you, Madam Chair. A question for Ms. Izquierdo or Ms. Fields, this document, I know it's for our approval, but is this document distributed district-wide to parents?
To the chair, the document is available on the website under the testing calendar. It's on our website, and it's also in the school operations under all the calendars.
But if I may, through the chair, it's a very good question. This is a technical document for the approval of the board to satisfy a statutory requirement. As it was said, the document that's made available to parents through the toolkit at the beginning of the school year during open house is much more interactive and simplistic in nature. Very, very good point. What's happened here is that people have used a technical document for the approval of the board, much like a procurement item or a health insurance item, which is very complex, right, for your approval, but we would never use it to explain to parents. And that, to a certain extent, is the unfortunate nature of this issue. Now, hindsight is 20/20, right? So if we were not where we are today, if circumstances beyond our control and certainly beyond this district had not happened, we would not be here. Had we had more time, probably in our presentation to the board, we would have had this document, but also side by side, the more interactive, easier to understand, more specific to your child way of interpreting the assessment implications that would be before that child or the parent.
You captured the spirit of my question. Thank you. And I wanted to publicly say what I texted the superintendent this morning when I read his op-ed. I think it achieved the perfect balance. And I think everyone on this board, from my time here and from hearing their comments, understands that we do need to assess students. We all have our issues with the assessments. A lot of us have common concerns, like the ELL issue, which we addressed last week together with the governor of the state and the education secretary. The VAM obviously needs to be reformed and taken a look at. But to go back to the days where we did not assess and hold schools accountable is quite frankly immoral, because I think a lot of you probably remember what that was like. It was okay for schools in certain areas not to do as well because they weren't expected to do as well. For anyone to try to transport us back to that time when we only cared about how certain children were doing is ludicrous. It's wrong. And what that other county did was highly responsible, because there are so many ways to address this issue, so many ways to work with the state the way we have done, and we will continue doing, because this is an imperfect accountability system. But to say that we don't need to have an accountability system is to say that we don't need to count every child. So I will always advocate, no matter where I'm at, I will always advocate for a strong and fair accountability system. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And Dr. Perez?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And first, I'd like to say that I think the superintendent's op-ed piece today was excellent, and all those people who are interested in this topic and haven't read it, I hope that they will be able to look at it and understand some of the complexities that the district and the whole education system in the whole country face, in my opinion. And I'm going to reiterate some of what some of my colleagues have said. Ms. Regalado herself, she stated that something, and Dr. Feldman as well, that I think we all agree that perhaps that there is too much testing, and that for some children it's overwhelming, and we don't want to overwhelm children. We want them to feel a little pressure, but we want them to feel that it's okay, I'm going to do well, that they're prepared. But as Mr. Corbello has said, we certainly do not want to go back to the days when I was a teacher and social promotion was okay, and all you had to do was basically breathe, and you could pass to the next level because you were old enough. Because that really, in my opinion, works against the students that need
that need the help the most, the students whose parents perhaps don't know how to help their children. And so we have to find the sweet spot where we test what children know, but we cannot, I agree with Mr. Corbello, we cannot go back to the days of nothing at all, because I think that is a danger. And to reiterate, I think, what my colleague Dr. Bedros-Minigo has said, parents are the key. We know for years and years of research tells us that the number one most effective thing in helping a child do well in school is the parents. So the more informed our parents are, the better our children will perform. So again, I'm thankful that the superintendent wrote the piece, and again, I'm glad that Dr. Feldman clarified, and Ms. Field and Ms. Izquierdo, that this doesn't mean that what we're approving today does not mean that every child is going to be taking every one of these tests. And to put that message out there is irresponsible. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Dr. Perry. Dr. Feldman, sir?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I think this is quite an appropriate conversation for people that have been elected to be school board members. This is what it's about. It's about our kids and making sure that they are getting the best opportunities and access and education that we can get for them. To that end, I've heard comments referring to your editorial this morning, Mr. Superintendent, and I just had an opportunity to read a couple of pages. Could you, and I think it's important for people to hear, could you touch on these 4 items out of the ones that you listed that I think parents would be interested in? One is talking about that the idea about constructing a new assessment test and being able to utilize it and test it in a place where their children live versus where it is currently being tested. Number 2, if I might, you talked about suspending a second year of the accountability of grades, 1 year beyond what it is currently, and maybe why you feel that way. And the third one would be how are we able to insulate our teachers from being evaluated by unreliable achievement data? Thank you, sir.
To the chair.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for the question. Before I answer, let me just convey to the board how the level of pride I feel in you as a collective governmental institution that addresses these issues as the center point of discussion, as it should be. I think it's shameful and unfortunate that, to a certain extent, confusion and political advantage has been tried to be obtained throughout the state by capitalizing on issues that really should be about teachers and students. And you're not allowing for that to happen here. And you ought to be commended for that. And sometimes it takes the higher judgment of what is often across the state and unfortunately our country. The silence of that majority that says, we believe this is wrong, but we don't want to step out and talk about it because the fire that comes at you from a disconnected, sometimes irresponsible minority is so painful and hurtful that fills the space. And you're not allowing that to take place here. And you're focusing the conversation on teachers, on students, and on parents. And that is exactly the only conversation you should be having. So I will go through the 4 or 5 specific recommendations very quickly, because I think that they embody, as Ms. Regalado said, as you said, as most of you have said, conversations that we have had over the past, not just last year, but the past 3 to 4 years. So number 1, let's start at the top, because as Mrs. Izquierdo and Field have said, the assessment question, some of it is driven by federal mandates. And I do think that we need to pay close attention and revisit what I believe is an inflexible and flawed federal policy that mandated impossibilities when No Child Left Behind was first approved. And then, unfortunately, when in the middle of the economic recession, Florida competed for Race to the Top, and then after that, when Florida applied for the waiver, I believe in earnest that in an effort to relieve ourselves of certain federal mandates, we were willing to accept equally onerous requirements of our state. And that needs to be revisited. And on that, we need to pay close attention, obviously, to the impact that federal requirements are having, particularly on English language learners and students with disabilities. It is irresponsible, immoral, unethical to expect children who are still learning the language to sit for an exam after one single year of instruction and demonstrate proficiency side by side a native speaker. Irresponsible. The second issue deals with the statutory timelines for accountability implementation. And I think a number of you touched on this. There is clearly a rush to develop assessment and implement that assessment for no other reason other than complying with a statutory timeline that at this point I believe is impossible to meet. So this rush to roll out the new assessments to simply comply with existing statute is wrong. I think we ought to have the courage to say, let's press the pause button and fix it before we proceed, lest we hurt kids, teachers, parents, or the perception of the viability of public education. The third point is that deals specifically with the assessment. And the assessment is being called the FSA, the Florida State Assessment. And as you know, via a contract, the state hired an entity, AIR, to construct this assessment. I am urging the state, quite frankly, to not necessarily revisit that decision, but ask the tough questions that perhaps were not asked at the time of contracting, such as, does this entity have experience, professional experience, in generating educational assessments? Have they ever generated a single educational assessment, particularly in a K-12 environment? I think that's an important question. Second question, are the steps in place to launch this assessment in line with the minimum requirements of statistical validity and reliability? Meaning, as you're developing sample questions, the questions for the exam, you need to test those questions. It's what's called a field test. Administer those questions to groups of students, evaluate the impact, make determinations regarding test bias to see if those questions should make it to the assessment or not. And this process usually results in some questions being booted out. Here's the problem, folks, is that AIR and the state determined that the field testing, not of the whole exam because the whole exam does not exist, but the field testing of individual questions would be performed in Utah rather than Florida. You cannot find a more demographically dissimilar state from Florida than Utah. If there is to be any believability that this is a valid exam, the principles of field testing, not only of the sample questions, but the entire exam, need to be conducted in Florida with Florida students. Nothing less than that should satisfy us. The next issue is that I think the state needs to have the courage to own and address the issue of over-assessment, over-testing. Look what we're doing here. We have gone around and around to explain, time and time again, that the vast majority of the assessments that are reflected in this testing calendar are mandates of the state. I have not heard the state say a single thing about the mandates that they approved. Shocking, right? Why is that? I will not answer that question, but there's a reason as to why the state is not stepping in to a conversation that really belongs to them. This was approved. This is mandated by the state. So I do think that the state ought to take one step back and conduct a detailed analysis about every single mandated test, exam, and assessment, research the origin, and then make decisions regarding the duplicative nature of the data that the state is collecting, and make decisions that perhaps you can eliminate some of these assessments because you're getting like data through other means. eliminate the redundancy, and allow more time for teaching rather than testing. Equally important, this insanity, and a number of you touched on this, and Mrs. Kier is extremely passionate about this, the insanity of forcing districts across the state to generate end-of-course exams for everything that is taught is nothing but insane. It is a costly insanity, the likes of which we as a nation have never seen. Those dollars that are being spent on developing these end-of-course exams for everything, from computer classes to art to music to physical education alongside reading, writing, and arithmetic, is going too far. If there was underwater basket weaving, there would be an end-of-course assessment for that too. It has gone too far. So I think the state needs to revisit the mandate specific to end-of-course exams. And the question, once again, needs to be asked, why would the state create that mandate? And as Ms. Regalado said a little while ago, and as it was reflected in my piece, the only reason was not to determine whether or not kids were learning, was to plug in a factor towards the evaluation of a teacher and performance pay. We believe teachers need to be evaluated, but to go through the insanity of end-of-course exams for every single one of the courses we teach in Miami-Dade. And I'm going to ask Mrs. Garrett in a second, I'm going to give them a little bit of time for them to research how many different independent courses we teach. And that will give you a sense as to what the total number of end-of-course exams could become. And I'm telling you right now, that is something, as superintendent, I'm not going to do. It doesn't make sense. But there's a respectful and legal way of opposing that. The fourth point is that the state needs to take a position of abandoning its planned use of baseline data to generate school grades this year, to generate evaluative data for teachers, because in our state, academic information is generated through two means. One, performance, which is a static measure. Performance means I ask Ms. Castillo to write an essay, I give her a score on that essay. That is a static observation. This is what she can perform right now. But then there's the other piece, which is a reliance on learning gains. How much did Ms. Castillo improve over a year after being taught how to write? It's fair, right? How much you know and how much you learned during a year. Learning gains versus performance. Now, members of the board, I think you would agree with me. If this is the first time we are administering the assessment, an assessment that does not yet exist, that has not passed the requirements of validity, reliability, and field testing in our state with our kids, you're not going to get any more than baseline data. For a fair determination of student performance or teacher performance, or even principal or school performance, you need to be able to compare today's data with last year's data. Now, you're going to fill in the blank for me. What data from last year? It doesn't exist, because this is a new exam. And to try to pervert the accountability system by comparing this year's data from an exam to something else, and there are people trying to do that, is irresponsible, unethical, immoral, unscientific. So, my fourth recommendation is urging the state to absolutely abandon its desire to use baseline assessment data, which is first-time ever data, as a means of generating school grades, teacher evaluation, or any other of the consequences or mandates usually prescribed under this accountability system. It just doesn't make sense. And lastly, and this is the fifth point, time inconclusive and statistically unreliable achievement data that is produced through baseline assessment information to a teacher's evaluation that then would drive performance pay is irresponsible and immoral, for the same reasons that I just gave you on the fourth point. That is the somewhat compromised position that the state finds itself in. They're rushing something through just to get it done. And for me, and I think for you, it's not about simply getting it done, it's about getting it done right, lest we cause irreparable harm to our kids and to our teachers. Madam Chair, let me close by simply saying this. Accountability and assessment, as all of you have said, are important elements and tools of truth. But let us not forget that the only defensible and responsible use of assessment is to improve teaching and learning. When you begin to use that data for other elements, you are losing something, you're hurting someone, you're losing sight of the true use of assessment and accountability. So again, I think there is a moral imperative at play here. And as I said in my piece, there's a lot of bickering, and sometimes the folks who come to the mic speak to you as if you've done something wrong, when in reality you've been on the right side fighting these issues. There's a lot of bickering, there's a lot of debate, there's a lot of negativity, and our kids are listening, and they're watching. And I think that we are confusing them with somebody's confusing ways. And it is time for us to gain and regain the moral ground that we once possessed as a state, as far as accountability is concerned. And that day should be today. Start right now. I think we have not done what others have done, which is simply say, throw this away, throw that away, let's not do this. We have addressed the issues, but are also providing a roadmap on how to bring about practicable solutions that are reasonable and respectful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. Dr. Holloway, sir?
Madam Chair, I do applaud us for the types of conversations, discussions we've had through these last few months regarding this assessment subject. But my thoughts are, it's just been talk. Talk. Now, what actions do we take, or what options do we have to present this to the state for their consideration? Now we've got to move, not as extreme as other districts have done and caused the alarm to graduates, but we've got another responsibility now to do something. That's the step that I think we've got to find that we can all get behind and take the action steps that we need. So I applaud the superintendent for looking and outlining these points for us. And we have them. We have them, but what do we do with them is my question.
Is there anyone going to respond? I think that was the question. Oh, Mr. Harvey? Is he the one that's going to respond? No?
No, I thought Ms. Regalado had her hand. I apologize.
I'm sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I'm sorry, I was not sure.
It's okay. T, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think I made reference to it when I was speaking about our legislative priorities and how I think beyond kicking the can and asking for more time, what we need to do is once and for all address the mistakes that were made when merit pay was passed at the state level. We all agree that these tests don't make sense. I think if we went out and we explained to our parents how this came about, they would agree with us. And I agree with Dr. Holloway in that we have a responsibility not just to opine on this, but as policymakers to take action on it. I want to thank the superintendent for delineating the points that he made, but as a board, we need to take action on whether we agree with those points or not. Respectfully, Mr. Superintendent, it's just your opinion, and we are the policymakers that have to decide if this is going to be the policy of this board going forward. The questions that we have been asked by our parents and our constituents is, do we agree with the decision that has been made at Lee County? Are we considering something similar? I think that we have all answered those questions in different areas, but I think it's about time that we put it to bed and consider what our options are and what our priorities as a district are. I believe that first and foremost, we need to address merit pay, and we need to do that with changes to the statute. But obviously the superintendent has raised a series of other issues. Some of us I think we all talked about the op-ed and that we liked it, but I think as policymakers we have to make a decision on whether we agree with all those points, if we do or if we don't, and how far are we willing to go and what should we prioritize. Now, obviously, I think that this should come as a board item, and this is something that we need to discuss. And I'm open to the suggestions of the board on this, because I think we've been clear about our position, but I think we need to give staff some guidance on how far we want to go and how we want to prioritize this, and if we have other concerns beyond the ones that have been articulated by the superintendent.
Mr. Superintendent, I think you wanted to say something, and I would like to say something too.
It would be very brief, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Yeah.
So my 5 recommendations are, again, as I said, they're the result of soul searching over the weekend and trying to encapsulate all of the issues in generalities and many instances in specifics into 5 key elements or recommendations. And the one that Ms. Regalado keeps bringing up, with its merit pay, performance pay, isn't here. When I talk about the tying of inconclusive and statistically unreliable achievement data to teacher evaluation and performance-based scales through a flawed value-added model, that's exactly the legal language that's used in Tallahassee to address that issue, and I agree wholeheartedly. So I try to encapsulate, once again, the major issues with enough flexibility to include the discomfort that, as Ms. Regalado just said, we hear from parents, from teachers, and I've heard from this side of the dais as spoken by you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. Before I keep on calling board members, I was going to say it at the end, but since Ms. Regalado brought up this subject, I would like to express what I was going to do this morning, which I did not do. This morning, last night when I read online Superintendent's op-ed article, I decided to bring a good cause item. It was going to be agenda item H2. And in that item for the board, exactly pretty much what Ms. Regalado was saying, it was my interpretation first to endorse and support Superintendent's op-ed piece, that I think it was very good. But then I thought that I should bring something to the board for the board to take action, exactly what you said. The problem that I had when I started putting my words in paper, it was very, very short time. I did not want board members to have to see or accept a good cause item that I always like to give board members time to understand, to read what my position in that paper was. That was merely besides the support and endorsing of what Superintendent said, but it was my thoughts of what us as a board, we as a board, should take action. And the reason I didn't do it, and maybe I should have rushed it, but I don't like to rush board members ever. So I thought that, well, first of all, I am so proud of all of you and the comments you heard. I think you would have liked very much what my thoughts were, and we would have taken action today. Again, but I realized also as I was starting to write it that besides being in a rush way, that I don't like to burden you with any of that. I thought the board will do the right thing. I have a lot of confidence and trust in this board. And certainly I've heard all of you doing what I expected all of you to support what is right for students, for teachers, for parents, and not what has been said in many publications about what they consider it to be, kind of a small scandal or a tempest in a teapot. But this board, obviously, my thoughts were right, but I think Ms. Regalado is right, and I should have done it, but there's always time for me to do it, and then we can all contribute to what action should be taken. It's unfortunate that I have to wait until next board meeting to do it, but you have my commitment that I'm going to do so. Because I haven't even halfway written, I just did not do it. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Cubella, Mr. Mascasilla, and Dr. Feldman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't want anyone to have the impression that all we do is talk and that we've never achieved anything. We have, over the years, achieved many concessions from the State Board of Education. We have gotten things done in the legislature. Just last week, we got the governor and the education secretary to join our fight for justice for our ELL students. So, I mean, we have to, on the one hand, recognize the work we have done and what we have achieved, and on the other hand, recognize the fact that we don't make state education policy. If we really wanted to do that, There are positions that people can run for, but from the school board, it's very hard to dictate to the state what the state's education policy should be. What we can do is advocate and fight and let people know the truth and let them know what's happening in our classrooms on the ground. But I certainly, because I have fought together with many of you, with the superintendent, don't want anyone to have the impression that this is all talk here and that our input has never forced changes, reasonable and rational changes to state policy, because we would be wouldn't be honest if we would be saying anything but the fact that our input, our participation, and our voices have certainly been heard, at least for the 4 years that I've been on here.
Thank you, Mr. Cordova. And just for the record, what my item is going to do is exactly for us to recommend. Certainly we cannot make state law. That's not our job, and this was only for us to take a position, which we do many times, a position on a certain issue and to become a legislative priority. That was the intent of the item, which, again, it should have been presented today. Ms. Castillo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's great to open up a school board meeting discussing something that's so important to our community, to our parents, to our students. This hasn't been an issue that I think we know all of us have been hearing about, and this is a confusing issue. Like the superintendent said, it's really not only to our parents but to our students who are hearing, speaking with them. They walk into school, first week of school, we just opened, and they don't know what's expected out of them. So I think it's very confusing. And now I wanted to ask in a follow-up that the superintendent mentioned earlier, something usable, parent-friendly, but it's also student-friendly. If we will be having a document within the next few weeks, hopefully I know we're going to try for a short notice for the opening of schools, but maybe in open houses, but maybe in the next few weeks where it does explain or it does have on a student grade level, and also how the results are being used for these tests. Because I think the students also like to know what they're going through on these tests and how those results are being used for them to be able to move on to the next grade level. So, and also I wanted to thank Madam Chair, your intent to bring a board item next month I think is wonderful. I'm honored to be here with my colleagues moving these steps forward for our students. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Dr. Feldman, is there anyone else want to speak? Dr. Feldman, I know want to speak. And Ms.
Yes,
Regalado,
ma'am. Thank you. So we're at a great point, and that is everybody's expressed their opinions, and while we are not allowed to talk with each other except here in public, and we're not allowed to share thoughts and ideas, validations, unless it's in the public view, I'm wondering out loud, Madam Chair, rather than waiting another month, since this is such an important item, I'm wondering if you would be willing to proffer a motion that would do two things. It would direct the superintendent to prepare a set of recommendations of actions on the items that we've been talking about, and two, to direct the attorney to prepare a legal brief for us in terms of what our options would be, such as injunctions, etc., that would coincide with what we're asking the superintendent to do. And I'd be happy to second that if you thought it was appropriate.
The attorney wants to say something. What do you want to say, Mr. Attorney?
Yes, through the chair. With regard to, since the motion is not part of the agenda, the chair would have to find good cause for the motion. The motion being that the op-ed piece appeared in the paper recently, and the fact that the board may want to consider the action at this point, there could be a basis if the chair wanted to find good cause for this motion, and if the board wanted to consider that item at this time, it could, but it has to first find good cause. You have to find first good cause before the motion is entertained. Thank you.
I think Mr. Dr. Feldman will have the floor, and then Ms. Regalado wants to say something too.
So then let me just back up a step. Since it's not part of the actual conversation, then I would ask that if the chair was so willing to do a motion that would speak to the testing program, the accountability issues that are part of this particular item, in a way that would ask you to bring back any legal concerns for us, as well as asking the superintendent to bring back recommendations on dealing with the testing issue, dealing with the timing issue, dealing with how tests are used to evaluate teachers, etc.
Ms. Regalado?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And Larry, I understand what you're saying. My concern is that, and I have to agree a little with the chair, that it's probably better to put something in writing, only because I think that there will be parents that will want to come and talk about testing. And I want to give them that opportunity. If we do it this way, we're gonna deal with it, and we're gonna receive a memo, and we're gonna have the information, but we really don't give anybody an opportunity to come and weigh in. I understand that there isn't much to weigh in on. I think we all agree. But I would like to see an actual item that's in the agenda that really lays this out, because just in the same way that we've been contacted by a lot of parents, I'm sure there's a lot of parents and members of the PTA that would like to give their 2 cents on this. That being said, I always want a legal opinion from Walter Harvey on what we can do, and I always feel like we don't get a lot of that. So I would be all for a motion that asks Walter what our legal options are. I think that Iraida has been very clear, and if we have legislation that's going to address some of the issues that we brought up here, I think that's an opportunity. I would like to remind the board that at our committee meeting, Pam Stewart was sitting there talking about how every district follows Miami-Dade County. I had to get up and drink some water because that was just a joke. But if she thinks so, that would be great. So I think that we have a lot of opportunity here, especially on an election year, to make some changes at the state level. And I think there's a lot of districts who also faced with this burden of test creation are going to want a solution. So if we can proffer a solution as early as possible, I think that we should do that. I don't think we should wait to the legislative session, but I think that we should give everybody an opportunity to weigh in on that decision. And finally, I think it's important to consider the conversation that we've had and the different moving parts. I think that we have an opportunity as a board to discuss this further. I think we all agree with the points that the superintendent raised. None of us have said that we don't. And we want to move on this as soon as possible. I just don't want anyone to think that we're preventing anyone from talking on this subject, because I think that testing is something that parents want to talk about. And even if we are limited in what we can do, we at least have the responsibility to hear them out and hear their opinions, even though I know as school board members we have been listening to their concerns.
Requesting the attorney for a legal opinion, but for your information, on the Florida School Board Association website, there's already posted a legal opinion on this matter. So we can all look at that, besides asking our attorney to do so.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Dr. Holloway, sir.
Okay. Yes, I think that the op-ed piece represents a framework for us to begin our action plan to focus on. I think going to our attorney and the other resources that we have available to us will help us to prioritize and to establish a game plan that we would need to move forward. The item today deals with a mandated requirement that we must act upon, and I don't want us to lose sight of what we are here to do today. But going forward with the structure that we have, we certainly have discussion points and action items and other resources and recommendations at our disposal. So that is what I'd like to call us back to as we move forward from here.
So I think that we all have spoken. Dr. Pierce, I'm sorry, I apologize. Dr. Pierce.
I would like to move that we approve the adoption of the superintendent's 5 recommendations, and then follow that up with the chair next month bringing the item, and that satisfies the problem of having it in writing and having the board, the public be able to address it. I move that item. if I may.
Can that be done, Mr. Harvey? Because you mentioned before that because but Dr. Perez's suggestion, in my opinion, is very valid because she is addressing the item that is in the agenda and adding a recommendation. Is that goes well with you, sir?
Yes, through the chair, what you may do is just simply amend the item, and I think her motion can be construed as a request to amend the item, and then, of course, you would have to handle the motion accordingly.
So, Dr. Perez, would you like to make that motion?
Yes, I would like to make a motion to support the item and amend the item to also approve the adoption of the superintendent's 5 recommendations that he spoke of, and then follow it up next month with the chair's recommendation that she bring forth something in writing that would therefore satisfy anyone in the public that would like to address the item. Okay?
It's been seconded. All those in favor? Yes, sir? I'm sorry, sir? Yes, it's been moved and seconded, yes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I certainly appreciate the collegial way of putting that all into the same basket. A concern, and only because a concern with the item, with your motion, is that I don't know that all of the things presented in the op-ed piece encompasses everything that I've heard up here. I heard things such as unfunded mandate. I heard from Mrs. Regalado other issues. So if you were able to incorporate the other things that board members have said today as issues of importance, I certainly would be able to follow suit with you.
Dr. Furman, I think you know me well. You know I don't copy what anybody else says. You know perfectly well my item was, yes, support what I read, but I'm sure you realize that I would put my thoughts together with your thoughts in the item, especially, and I'm glad I didn't bring it, or I did, even though the item is written almost here. But I wanted to hear you out. Now I heard you. I will listen to the tape, and certainly I will add everything that I hear you, or have heard you today. So for me, it's been a great exercise of what good government is, what we have done here today, especially in the school board. And don't worry, the item, no, I know you're not worried, but I just wanted to make sure that you know what my recommendations are going to be. Some of them, that the op-ed piece, but some of them will be my recommendation, and certainly we would amend the item to include yours.
May I, just to clarify a piece?
Yes.
In all due respect, I was speaking to what Dr. Perez was putting forth. It wasn't what you would be bringing. I mean, I have full confidence in all of our abilities to move forward, but I was merely saying that the motion that she made was that his 5 or 6 be the framework. That's what I heard. My issue was I heard other things that impacted her motion, not on what you're bringing back as a board item. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear, that I was not directing you or your item, future item. It was merely asking the board member, Ms. Dr. Perez, if she would broaden it a little bit so that it did include some of the things. Now, it's not my item, not my motion. I'm happy to do whatever my colleagues would like us to do at this point.
Thank you, sir. Now, I believe if I understood Dr. Perez right, I don't think Dr. Perez specifically said that the item should reflect word by word or action by action or recommendation by recommendation. I believe, if I heard right, Dr. Perez indicated in her motion that I should bring an item. And the item would be my item. I believe that that's what I heard. And and I didn't take any offense to anything, Dr. Feldman. I just was trying to explain the way I do things, and I think you know that well. And I think that's fine. We can move in second. If you want any more discussion, I'll be pleased to entertain it. If not, we can move. We can go on as amended, what Mr. Harvey said. We move on the amendment or the item as amended, sir?
Through the chair, first you must take a vote on the amendment and then the item as amended.
Thank you for your help, sir. I need all those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye. Opposed, say nay. All those in favor of the item as amendment signify by saying aye. Opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Congratulations, sir. We need to speak? Yes?
I don't need to. I'd like to. Thank you.
Certainly may, sir.
Let me just offer a very quick reflection. You as a board have just taken up one of the most gnarly, difficult, complex issues that's currently being debated in the state and across the country. And I can tell you that you've done it with the intelligence, with the dignity, and the thorough examination, the likes of which I have not seen any other board do. So for that, I really want to commend you, the board, for the way in which you tackle this issue, the likes of which, as I said, I have not seen any other board do. This is a tough conversation, a complex issue, and you handled it, I believe, in an extremely respectful and intelligent and methodical way, and I just really wanted to put that on the record. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. And thank you to your staff. Thank you, Mrs. Kierga, Ms. Field. Thank you very much for all your assistance. Thank you. And I have a request from Ms. Regalado. I hope she's here. Ms. Regalado had requested to move agenda item H11 to the floor.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Well, first I need to ask the board if a motion to move H11. All those in favor say aye. Opposed say nay. H11 is on the floor. H11 is the hour of code 2014.